It was the pounding on my bedroom door that pulled me from sleep. 6 o'clock sharp. My son's voice cut through the wood, hard and impatient. Sign the deed or get out. No good morning, no hesitation. Just an order, as if I were a tenant in my own home. I sat up slowly, letting the words settle like cold stones in my chest. When I finally stepped into the hallway, the air still carried the faint, bitter smell of last night's coffee. Down in the kitchen, the shadows of the chairs stretched across the tile in the early light. On the wall above the counter hung the photograph of my late husband, Daniel, his steady gaze meeting mine like it always had in life. It was a silent reminder of what this house truly was. This place was not an asset waiting to be liquidated. It was a monument to every nail we hammered, every night we spent fixing, painting, planting, and building a life inside these walls. And yet, to my own son, it was nothing more than a line on a balance sheet. I said nothing. Over the years, I have learned that silence can be sharper than any insult. It cuts without the swing of a hand, and in the hands of someone patient enough, it can be honed into the most dangerous blade of all. Today, I decided I would sharpen mine. I was on my way to the kitchen that morning, moving slow the way I do now, each step measured. The floorboards under the hallway runner gave their familiar creak. I had almost reached the corner when I stopped. My son's voice drifted from the living room, low but sharp in the quiet of the house. He was on the phone. I could hear the half laugh he used when he wanted to sound casual but was pressing for something important. He said the words like they were nothing. "She is becoming a burden." My hand froze on the wall. The word echoed inside me, heavy and sour. A burden. As if the decades I had spent raising him, keeping a roof over his head, and building this home with my own 2 hands had been erased in a single breath. I leaned back against the wall, letting the shadows swallow me. I did not move. I wanted to hear the rest. His voice dipped lower, but the key phrases still reached me. The house, releasing the capital, market is good now. She will thank us later. It was the kind of talk people use when they are moving pieces around a chessboard. Only this time the piece in question was me. He ended the call with a brisk promise to follow up. A moment later he walked past me, startled to see me standing there. "Morning," he said, his tone quick, eyes sliding past mine. I nodded but did not answer. Not because I could not, but because I knew silence would make him wonder how much I had heard. In that moment I felt something shift. Until then I had wanted to believe his recent push about selling the house was motivated by concern. Concern about my age, my safety, the upkeep of a place too large for me alone. I had even considered the possibility that he was trying to protect me in his own misguided way. But hearing that word, burden, stripped away the illusion. It was not about my well-being. It was about what this house could give him once it was no longer mine. He saw it as a stack of bills waiting to be cashed, a transaction waiting to be signed. He had forgotten, or maybe never understood, that for me this house was not just a piece of property. It was the last living link to my husband, to the years we spent together building a home and a life. I stood there for a long while after he left, my hand still resting on the wall. The grain of the wood was smooth under my fingertips, worn down by years of paint and sanding. I thought about the first night my husband and I slept here, the way the air smelled of fresh plaster and new beginnings. Those memories were mine, and no one would convert them into a number on a check. That morning I made a decision. I would not confront him in anger. That would be too easy for him to dismiss. Instead, I would play the long game. If he wanted to treat this like a business deal, I would treat it like a negotiation he could never win. I would watch, I would listen, I would take my time. People who are impatient make mistakes, and my son, for all his scheming, had never been patient. I, on the other hand, had spent a lifetime learning the value of waiting for the right moment. It was how my husband and I built this place, one board, one nail, one careful step at a time. The first crack had appeared. I could feel it, the hairline fracture in the image I had held of him, and like any crack, it would only spread with time. My task now was simple: make sure it spread exactly where I needed it to. I walked the length of the hallway slowly, the way I always do when the house is quiet enough for me to hear its own breathing. The morning light slanted through the high window, laying long bars of gold across the floor. My fingers found the banister at the top of the stairs. The wood was smooth in some places, worn in others, each groove and dent telling a story. My husband had installed it himself, measuring and cutting the oak until it fit just right. I could see him in my mind, crouched with a pencil behind his ear, frowning as he lined up the bracket. The smell of sawdust had filled the air that day, mixing with the scent of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. That banister has felt the press of our hands for decades, hands carrying laundry baskets, steadying children learning to climb stairs, guiding me in the dark during late-night trips for a glass of water. Every scratch along its length is a season we survived. The living room was still dim when I reached it. The heavy curtains drawn against the early glare. I let my hand slide along the back of the couch, another piece we had chosen together. In the corner stood the old bookshelf we had found at a flea market before we were even married. We had sanded it down, polished it, and filled it with the books we read aloud to each other in those early years. Some of those books are still there, their spines cracked, their pages carrying the faint smell of old paper. This house is more than a shelter. It holds the years inside its walls the way a tree holds rings inside its trunk. The kitchen tiles we laid ourselves, still slightly uneven in one corner because we ran out of mortar that night. The garden out back, where the rose bushes my husband planted keep coming back every spring no matter how hard the frost. The faint mark on the garage wall where my son crashed his bike the first time he tried to ride without training wheels. Every part of it is connected to a moment, a memory. It has absorbed the sound of our laughter, the heat of our arguments, the silence of our grief. The floors know the weight of our footsteps. The windows have framed the faces of neighbors stopping by to share coffee or news. Even the attic, dusty and dark, smells of the past, of stored Christmas ornaments and boxes of photographs. So when someone suggests I should downsize, I hear something very different. They are not just asking me to move. They are asking me to dismantle the life I built piece by piece. To strip away the proof that we existed here in all our seasons. To them, it is a property. To me, it is a living witness. That is why every hint my son drops about moving me somewhere easier feels like an insult dressed as kindness. This place has seen me at my strongest and my weakest. It has held me when there was no one else to hold me. The idea that I should leave it behind as if it were nothing more than an inconvenient address is not just impractical, it is unthinkable. I stood in the middle of the living room, letting my eyes trace the familiar lines of the ceiling beams, the way the paint had faded just slightly over the years. I thought about how many more winters the banister might see, how many more springs the roses might bloom. I had no intention of letting those memories be turned into profit. The walls around me were not just walls, they were part of me, and I was not for sale. It started small, almost harmless if you didn't know what to look for. A brochure appeared on the kitchen table one morning, glossy and colorful, showing smiling elderly couples playing cards in a bright common room. Across the top, in large, cheerful letters, it read, "Your next chapter safe, simple, secure." I knew my son had put it there. He did not even bother to hide the fact. Later that day, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, his voice light, like he was making casual conversation. "You know, Mom, these places have great amenities. On-site medical staff, daily activities, no yard work. You wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore." His eyes stayed on me, waiting for a sign of agreement, but I kept my face unreadable. I picked up the brochure and flipped through it. The pictures were staged, the smiles too wide. There was no smell of coffee brewing in the background, no worn banister polished by years of hands. Everything looked temporary, like a hotel you stay in before you move on to somewhere real. My son talked on, listing features like he was reading from a sales pitch. I nodded occasionally, the way you do when you want someone to keep talking so you can hear everything they think they are hiding. What he didn't know was that I had already noticed the way he hovered over his phone at night, scrolling through real estate listings, the glow of the screen lighting his face. I had glimpsed the icons for property apps, mortgage calculators, and something that looked like a spreadsheet. His fingers moved quickly as if he already had a plan. I listened to him describe the safety of living in a place with staff on hand, the freedom of not having to maintain a big house. Every word was wrapped in concern, but underneath I could hear the calculation. It wasn't about me being safe. It was about the value of this house and how quickly it could be turned into cash. When he left the kitchen, I stayed at the table, turning the brochure over in my hands. On the back was a price list for the different packages, monthly fees that could eat through a lifetime of savings in a few short years. I imagined him justifying the cost by pointing to the money he'd make from selling the house. That was when I made another decision. I would let him think his plan was working. I would act tired, hesitant, even a little confused at times. Let him feel like he was gaining ground. People who believe they are winning get sloppy. They reveal things. They underestimate the other player. In the days that followed, I played the role carefully. I asked small questions about the places in the brochures, like I was curious. I let him show me more listings. I even let him drive me past one of these retirement communities so he could see me looking at it through the car window. All the while, I kept my real thoughts locked away. I was not considering moving into one of those places. I was studying my son. Watching his face when he talked about a fresh start. Listening to the way he avoided saying the words "sell the house" outright, as if dressing it up in softer terms would make me agree. By pretending to be open to his suggestions, I gave him room to keep talking, and the more he talked, the more I learned. I learned how far along his plans were. I learned who he was speaking to and when, and most importantly, I learned just how certain he was that I would eventually give in. That certainty would be the thing that undid him. All I had to do was wait. The first thing I did after my son left for work that morning was walk to the garage. The air in there still carried the faint scent of motor oil and cedar from the old shelves my husband built. In the corner, behind a tall cabinet, sat the safe. It was heavy, the kind that cannot be carried out without planning, and it had been with us since the early years. My husband had bought it after we finished paying off the mortgage, saying every home should have a heart that cannot be stolen. I spun the dial slowly, listening for the soft clicks. Inside were the usual documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, a few small pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother. But tucked behind them was something far more important, a draft trust agreement my husband had started years ago. It wasn't complete, but it laid out exactly what he wanted, the house to remain in family hands. Passed to our grandson one day and protected from being sold without my consent. I ran my fingers over his handwriting in the margins. His notes were short, almost cryptic, but I knew what they meant. He had anticipated a day when someone might see this house as a prize rather than a home. That day had arrived. From the safe, I moved on to the bank. I took the bus into town, not telling anyone where I was going. At the bank, I asked to see my safety deposit box. It had been years since I last opened it. Inside were duplicates of all the key papers, the deed, the will, and certain receipts for work done on the house over the decades, the kind of records that prove ownership, investment, and intent. I checked each one, noting that they were all still in good condition, then locked the box again. Back home, I climbed the narrow steps to the attic where the air was thick with dust, in a small wooden trunk. I kept older records from my husband's contracting business. Some of them showed work he had done on this very house, all paid for in cash from our personal accounts. I set aside a few of the most important and stored them in a separate file. The last part of my quiet defense was newer technology. Months ago, I had installed 2 small cameras outside, one by the front door, another overlooking the garage. I told my son they were for porch deliveries, but in truth, they recorded to an off-site server I could access from anywhere. If anyone tried to enter without my permission, I would know. By the time I was done, I had mapped out every possible way my son might try to force my hand, from claiming I had lost capacity to making legal moves without telling me, and I had blocked each path. The trust draft would be completed and signed soon. The bank box was secure. The cameras would be my silent witnesses. He thought the advantage was his, that age had made me slow, that grief had made me careless. But what he didn't realize was that while he had been scrolling property apps and talking to agents, I had been building something of my own, not walls exactly, but a kind of perimeter. One he could not cross without me knowing, one that would turn any sudden move on his part into a mistake he could never take back. The house was mine, the history inside it was mine, and now the defenses around it were mine too. I waited for the right morning to set the trap. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made the smallest sound travel. My son had taken to wandering past my study more often lately, sometimes under the pretense of asking a simple question, sometimes with no pretense at all. I decided it was time to give him something to find. On my desk, I placed a plain manila folder. In thick black marker across the front, I wrote "Property Transfer Draft." The handwriting was deliberate, the kind that looks like it was meant for official eyes. Inside, there was nothing, just a few blank sheets to give it weight. No signatures, no legal text, nothing he could actually use. It was bait, and I made sure it looked like something worth stealing. Then I left the study door slightly ajar and went about my day. I could hear his footsteps when he came down the hall, slow and even at first, then pausing outside the doorway. The silence stretched. I imagined him glancing inside, seeing the folder sitting there like a secret left out in the open. From the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of his shadow crossing the doorway. He stepped in just far enough to reach the desk, his hand brushing the edge of the folder. He didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he moved on, but there was a change in his pace, a kind of restrained energy in the way he walked away. That evening, over dinner, he was more talkative than usual. But his words were coated in casualness. He asked how I was feeling, whether I had thought more about simplifying things. It was the same phrase he had used before, but this time there was something underneath it, a kind of eagerness he couldn't quite hide. In the days that followed, his routine shifted. More calls taken in low tones, more glances into my study when he thought I wasn't watching. Once I heard him on the phone saying, "We'll know soon." I didn't need to hear the rest to understand what he meant. The folder had done its job. It gave him hope that I was moving in his direction. Their transfer was already in the works, and people with hope in a plan are easier to track. Their timelines become predictable. By leaving that empty folder where he could find it, I hadn't just drawn him out. I had taken control of the tempo. I could watch for the signs, the small changes that meant he was preparing to make his move. And when he did, I would be ready to meet it on my terms. He thought the paper was the first step in my surrender. He didn't realize it was the first step in my counterattack. He brought it up over breakfast one Saturday, his tone light, like it was just a passing thought. "Mom, you've been cooped up in this house too long. How about a trip to the coast? Just a few days. Fresh air, sea breeze. You'll come back feeling brand new." He smiled the way he does when he's already decided the answer for me. I set my coffee cup down and let a small pause hang between us before I answered. "That sounds nice," I said, as if the idea were mine to accept. His shoulders relaxed, and he moved on to talking about hotels and scenic drives. I kept my face calm, but inside I knew exactly what this was. A few days away from the house would give him all the time he needed to act without me underfoot. That afternoon, while he was out, I took the real trust documents, the deed, and the key receipts from my safe. I placed them in a secure folder and walked them down to the bank. In the quiet of the vault, I slid them into my safety deposit box. The metal door shut with a solid finality that made me feel lighter. Nothing they might do in my absence could touch these papers now. Before leaving the bank, I logged into the account for my security cameras. I double-checked that both the front door and garage cameras were recording to the cloud. Any motion would be saved automatically. The idea wasn't just to protect the house, it was to watch exactly what happened while I was gone. The next week, we set out for the trip. He was in high spirits, playing the role of the thoughtful son. At the hotel, I went along with the schedule he planned, even let him think I was too tired to wander far on my own. But each night, when he and his wife were downstairs making calls, I opened my laptop and checked the feeds. The first 2 days, nothing unusual. On the third day, the footage changed. At 10:17 in the morning, a truck I recognized as belonging to a local locksmith pulled into my driveway. 2 minutes later, my son's car appeared beside it. The locksmith took out his tools and moved toward the front door. Then, like a scene from a play that had been rehearsed, my neighbor, Mr. Harris, appeared at the edge of the lawn with his dog. He walked straight up to the locksmith and said something I couldn't hear, but I knew his tone, polite but firm. He pointed at the cameras and then at the "no entry without owner" sign I'd given him to post in the window if this ever happened. The locksmith hesitated, glanced at my son, and after a short exchange, packed up his tools. My son stood there for a moment, his expression tight, before walking back to his car. They both drove away, the plan broken before it began. That night at dinner, my son was quieter than usual. I let him think I hadn't noticed, but I had. I had noticed everything, and now I had proof, not just of intent, but of action. The trip that was supposed to leave my house vulnerable had done the opposite. It had closed the net tighter around him, and he didn't even know it. The morning I went to see Martin, my lawyer, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that feels like a curtain drawn across the day. I took the bus instead of asking for a ride. The fewer people who knew where I was headed, the better. In my bed, zipped into a flat leather folder, were all the documents I had been guarding: the deed to the house, the papers for the lake property, and my husband's old trust draft. Martin greeted me in the quiet of his office, the smell of coffee and old books hanging in the air. He had been our attorney for more than 15 years, the kind of man who spoke little but listened closely. I laid the documents on his desk, one by one, watching his eyes as he read through them. "You're certain?" he asked after a while. "Certain," I said. "I want the house and the lake property placed into an irrevocable trust, with my grandson as the sole beneficiary. I keep full rights to live here until I'm gone. No one else has any claim or authority." He nodded, taking notes in his tight, precise handwriting. "And the power of attorney agreements, all revoked," I said. "From this day forward, the only trustee until my grandson is of age will be you, no exceptions." For the next hour we worked through the clauses line by line. He explained the protections, how an irrevocable trust meant the properties could not be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without my consent, and how even after I passed, the terms would hold. We added a condition that if my grandson was under 25 at the time of transfer, the trust would manage the properties until he reached that age. When everything was in place, Martin slid the final document toward me. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I signed my name slowly, the sound of the pen on paper like the click of a lock turning. When I finished, Martin countersigned and added his seal. "It's done," said, leaning back. "They can try whatever they like. Legally, they're out of moves." I gathered my copies, placing them back in the folder. A quiet relief spread through me, not the kind that makes you want to celebrate, but the kind that settles in your bones. My son and his wife could talk, threaten, hint, even plot, but the core of what they wanted was no longer within their reach. On my way out, Martin walked me to the door. "They'll make another attempt," he said. "People rarely stop just because the law says so, but they can't win now, not unless you let them." "I don't plan on letting them," I told him. Back home, I set the folder in my study, not hidden this time, but placed openly on the desk. It was the only copy they could ever touch, and it would tell them nothing that could help. Then I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the kitchen window, watching the bare branches move in the wind. I felt no need to rush, no urge to confront. The trust was in place, the power of attorney stripped away. They would still make their move. I knew them well enough to be certain of that. But when they did, I would be ready, and I could meet their last push with a calm they wouldn't understand. They chose a Thursday evening for their little presentation, setting the table like it was a holiday. Roast chicken, potatoes, a bottle of wine already breathing on the counter. It was unusual enough to make me suspicious. But I played along, sitting down and letting them ask about my day, the garden, the weather. They were both dressed better than usual. My son wore a collared shirt, my daughter-in-law a blouse she normally saved for events. We ate in a thin layer of small talk, each of us pretending the evening was nothing more than a shared meal. Then, as soon as the plates were cleared, my son reached under the table and placed a folder in front of me. "Just some paperwork," he said with a too casual smile, "to make things easier, in case something happens, you know." I rested my hand on the folder but didn't open it right away. "What kind of paperwork?" My daughter-in-law leaned in, her voice smooth. "It's just a transfer of ownership. You'd still live here, of course. We'd handle all the upkeep, bills, and legal stuff for you." I opened the folder slowly, my eyes scanning the first page. The legal language was dressed up to sound routine, but halfway down I found it, a clause that handed over not just ownership but guardianship in the event of diminished capacity, as determined by a medical opinion they could arrange. I read the word out loud. Letting it hang in the air, guardianship. The room went still. My son shifted in his chair. "It's just a standard provision," he said quickly. "Nothing to worry about." I looked up at him, meeting his eyes. "So this is the plan, not just the house. Control, decisions, my life in your hands." He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out tight. My daughter-in-law's smile had gone thin at the edges. "We're only trying to make sure you're safe," she said. "Safe," I repeated. "By taking away everything that keeps me standing." Interesting approach. The color rose in my son's face, and he sat back, crossing his arms. "You're reading too much into it." "No," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I'm reading exactly what you put in front of me." For a moment, no one moved. The food sat cooling on the plates. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table toward them. "Not signing," I said simply. My refusal didn't come with raised voices or slammed fists. It didn't need to. They had expected hesitation, maybe confusion, something they could talk me past. What they got instead was a clear line they could not cross. The rest of the night was brittle. They tried to smooth over the moment with more wine and light conversation, but the energy had shifted. They knew I had seen straight through them, and I knew they were already thinking about what to try next. They left the dishes in the sink when they went upstairs. I stayed behind, rinsing each plate slowly, letting the sound of the water mask the quiet satisfaction in my chest. The game had moved into the open now, and that was fine by me. In the open, there's nowhere to hide. Martin arrived just after 10 in the morning, his leather briefcase in hand and a calm, steady look on his face. I had asked him to come to the house this time. There was something fitting about finishing this here, inside the walls I was protecting. The kitchen was bright with late morning sun, the table cleared except for a neat stack of documents and a single pen. I heard my son's footsteps on the stairs as Martin unpacked the papers. My daughter-in-law followed a moment later, her expression already guarded. "What's going on?" my son asked, his voice casual but a shade too light. "I thought we'd make it official," I said, sliding into my seat at the table. "Martin has the final trust documents ready." They exchanged a quick look, the kind people share when they know they are about to lose something but haven't figured out how to stop it. Martin adjusted his glasses and began reading through the essentials, each clause a nail in the door they had been trying to force open. The house and lake property transferred to an irrevocable trust for my grandson. I retain lifetime residence rights. No other party may claim, sell, or alter the properties in any way. When he finished, he turned the document toward me and set the pen beside it. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hand. The nib touched the paper, and the sound it made, the slow scratch of ink on thick stock, was like the turning of a heavy lock. Each letter of my name closed another door to them. When I set the pen down, Martin signed as witness and added his seal. "That's it," he said. "It's binding. No one can interfere." I looked across the table at my son and daughter-in-law. From this moment on, any attempt to act on my behalf without my permission is null and void. The law will treat it as fraud, and you know what fraud means. My son's jaw tightened. My daughter-in-law looked down at the table. Neither spoke. Martin gathered the signed documents and tucked them back into his briefcase. "I'll have the certified copies filed by the end of the day," he said, rising from his chair. I walked him to the door, the weight in my chest replaced by a quiet satisfaction. Behind me, I heard my son's voice, low and clipped. "We can't stay here." His wife didn't argue. By the time Martin's car pulled away, I could hear the faint thump of drawers opening upstairs, the sound of clothes being packed. I made tea and sat at the table where it had all happened, the morning light now shifting toward afternoon. The pen still lay beside the empty space where the papers had been. I picked it up and turned it in my fingers. It was just a pen, but today it had been a key. Within the week, they were gone, leaving behind a silence that felt different from the one they used to create with their coldness. This silence was clean, like a room aired out after too long. The house was mine again, not just in name, but in peace. It was a week after they left when I decided to start clearing the upstairs closet they had been using. The room was quiet except for the sound of hangers scraping along the rod. Most of what they left behind was of no consequence, a few shirts, some worn shoes, a stack of magazines. I was halfway through pulling down a pile of blankets when I noticed a small wooden box pushed to the very back, almost hidden behind an old suitcase. I set it on the bed and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a square of faded velvet, was the silver bridal pin that had belonged to my late wife. It had gone missing more than a year ago, and I had long assumed it had been sold or lost for good. Next to it was a folded piece of paper. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was my son's, uneven and quick, as if he had written it in a rush. "Dad, I know you think the worst of me, and maybe you're right. I can't undo what I did, but I couldn't keep this. It's hers and it's yours. I'm sorry." I sat on the edge of the bed, the pin warm in my palm from where it had been resting in the box. The note was brief, no explanations, no promises. But it was something, a crack in the wall of cold calculation he had built around himself. A small proof that under all the greed and stubbornness, there might still be a part of him that remembered who we were before all of this. I placed the pin carefully in my own jewelry box where it would be safe. The note I kept in the drawer of my desk, not to forgive or forget, but to remind myself that even the hardest stone can show a fracture. That afternoon, my grandson came by, his laughter carrying from the garden before he even reached the door. We spent the day in the workshop at the back of the property, sanding down a length of oak for a birdhouse he wanted to make. When we were done, I pulled out a small brass key from my pocket. "What's this?" he asked, turning it over in his hand. "It's the key to this workshop," I told him. "One day it'll be the key to the whole house. When you're ready, when you're old enough, this will all be yours." He smiled, not fully understanding, but I could see the weight of the moment settle in him. I closed his fingers around the key. "This is your home," I said, "when you're ready." The late light spilled through the doorway, catching the dust in the air, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the balance shift back to where it belonged. The house was safe. The future was in the right hands, and somewhere behind that crack in the wall, maybe there was still a path back for my son. But for now, the door to that path would stay closed. The rain came steady through the night, tapping against the porch roof in a rhythm that felt like agreement. I sat by the window with a cup of tea cooling in my hands, the certified court papers resting neatly on the table beside me. The trust was official now, stamped and sealed. On paper and in truth, the house was secure. The quiet inside these walls was different than it had been in recent years. It was no longer the tense silence of people avoiding one another. It was the deep, easy stillness of a place at peace. Each room seemed to breathe again, holding its memories without fear of being stripped bare. I could walk from the kitchen to the garden and feel my husband's presence in the details, the way the wood was cut, the places he favored when he worked. This was no longer a contested space. It was home again. My son had left without ceremony, taking with him the note and the small apology he'd managed to offer. I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But I had left a space open for the possibility, a narrow path he could walk someday if he chose. Some doors stay locked until the right hands turn the key. Around my grandson's neck hung the small brass key to the workshop, its weight light for now but growing with time. He didn't fully grasp its meaning yet, but one day he would. I had not beaten my son, not in the way people think of victory. I had simply returned the house to its rightful heir. To the hands that would one day build and protect as I had. The rain softened, the air cooled, and the silence at last was kind.